Right, welcome everyone to the next multi-network community sync. Today is February 5th. I have few topics to talk about, exactly the project board, uh, talk about the commitments about implementation. I think this is something that we never touched on. I would like to kind of make it clear on who is willing to kind of implement the stuff we're doing. And lastly, I did link the design draft. This is still a work in progress, but feel free to start. I have some things there already. You can start reading and commenting on. Can you hear me okay? I'm not sure nobody's speaking.
Yeah, I can hear
Hear
you.
you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so you can see my screen, right? Hooray, me and I added Lionel as well. I finally got the admin rights. I think before Antonio was the only one that could modify um, the multi-networking dashboard that has been changed yesterday. So now I want to kind of propose how you're going to kind of structurize the project and what sort of items I want to add to kind of run it by the group. And then if there are any feedback around that one, let me know. Uh, Basically, I want to kind of kick off the alpha release project. Basically, that's what I kind of showed on the roadmap last week. By end of the year, likely maybe we can achieve alpha release with whatever you're going to plan in the design. And there, what I want to create is the items that are related to that effort. Probably can be more. If you see some more granularity needed, let me know. But basically, is just the first one, create a design doc. Then create a proof of concept with some initial version of the pod network that we have in the design, and then create controller for that, right? The POC is to kind of prove that we are on the right track, and figure out any corner cases or something that I don't know I haven't foreseen, or maybe through comments didn't came out, right? So this is the kind of first a few items. Then after all we do that and have a internal agreement on the design, let's go to the SIG networking and review and there and get their approval for that effort. And then just start the standard implementation work, right? And move towards implementation of the CRD and the controller. Probably the last piece can be split into further smaller items. But for now, this is kind of what I'm thinking. Any comments to the first thing? Anyone has some ideas or some feedback on that? All right, I take silence as an acceptance. And then lastly, something that Bowie brought up last week, to have a tracking of some sister efforts. At least I consider them so supporting efforts. So basically things that we are not going to track here as what is their progress, but we're gonna maybe we are, but in a form of just external participants, so that anyone trying to look at this will see that okay, is what else is happening in this area, and where can I get the data about those other things, right? So I want to create a supporting efforts. I'm not sure whether that's a good naming of a project, and basically add items that oh yeah, resource status, that's a fair point. Yes, isn't that done though, Lionel? I would consider that.
It's alpha. I think
Oh,
it's good
okay.
to track it.
So that's a fair point. Yeah, let's add that. Yeah. So basically, all the efforts that Lionel is driving, this is the generic endpoint slice, the CNI via DRA driver, and yeah, the status. And lastly, we have an efforts going towards enabling first the service cluster IP-like abilities in Gateway API. And this is our first step towards then converting that into support for multi-network in the future. So I want to kind of call that out so that folks are aware of things that's happening around that. You don't have to grab, maybe here is good to have them, but I'm planning whenever I'm going to create the items to have some full a lot of links to all the other projects, to whatever repositories and links and what's not, to kind of get people can get around on what's happening in the specific areas. So yeah, thanks for adding those, Lionel. Any other efforts anyone is aware and I might have missed?
Because Bowie was asking also last week, I created some slides with the history of what happens in the last few years.
Okay.
Saying we have done this book and this presentation, this blog post, etc., trying to gather every information. Probably I miss things and events. I could pass it in the document, but the today's work is quite kind of similar to what is in this reporting effort, I would say.
Yeah. All right.
I don't
yeah.
know where to add that.
Let's maybe, do you want to review that today or link it in the as an item here?
I mean, it was similar as reporting effort. It was the same goal as you mentioned, that Bowie was asking some reference where to find information. So
so yeah, if you have that gathered, then yeah, link it here and I can just, maybe it's easy my app job and I'm gonna add the items
okay.
here. Yeah, you're right. I see what you're saying.
Okay.
You got it, all the yeah, that's thanks. All right.
And if I miss something, sorry for that, but
no worries.
I maybe miss things.
No, that's fair. So yeah, that's you have this, but I will add it as a separate project as well on the dashboard. Yeah, the dashboard is empty. Someone was asking, Masahari. Yeah, I am planning. I didn't want to populate it before just running by the community. Any comments on this? Anyone seeing any other project we should track here?
DRA, how do you see it? The DRA features, for example, the cat that I shared last time about virtual devices.
Oh yeah, that's fair. Yeah, let's add that one as well. Yeah, because that's kind of a valid. I agree. Yeah, that's a fair point. Where was that scheduling?
I will add it.
You added it. Okay, so let's support. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
But my question was, what is the limit on the DRA tracking that we're doing?
So anything related to multi-networking, right? Any and all. I think I don't think we should track everything that's happening for DRA. Only the pieces that are directly related to this effort, right? So the status for networking devices, that's like the core, and then this one is as well extension, right? Do you see anything else, Lionel? I don't want to track the DRA because I don't think that's that. Let's go to that project, but anything that's of notice for this effort, right?
Okay, I just added last one.
So the DRA net, isn't that like a if I'm not mistaken, isn't that is going to be just a simplification of adding the connectivity between the DRA and network, or isn't that something similar what you did? I haven't looked into that. That was Antonio's doing.
I think the scope is. I think the scope is different, but I haven't fully catch the scope yet, I would say.
Right, because I don't think that will integrate with multi-network. This is supposed to be very lightweight, simple way to kind of, add the devices, kind of trickle the CNI stuff based on what's in the DRA. So, but yeah, that's happening as well. That's what Antonio kind of created. Anything else? Any other feedback towards this separation of projects? Yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm not that familiar with all the in-depth efforts that were going on, but there is one specific thing which I was interested in, and it is around how do we plan to implement DNS support for pod networks / multiple networks, and if that is being tracked as part of the alpha release, which is the first part of what Mache has, or if that is a supporting effort which we are not considering to solve in the first phase. And by DNS support, what I mean is like the okay,
so,
great.
it's something that look at the cluster IP. So maybe there's a lot. Yes, we are considering to handle this. Definitely, that's part of this effort, but not in alpha. I don't want to expand scope. DNS, if you think about it, this is like a nightmare. If you're gonna talk about it, just that, it's a probably 1 year of discussion, maybe not, but a lot of months of discussion just about that. So I am containing the scope. No, not alpha version. So that's that. Then start looking at this, because this is the first step. Because this is cluster IP done through Gateway API. This is where we are heading. Whatever they're gonna do there, that's what we are probably gonna inherit. So if you want to get engaged in DNS, not multi-networking strictly, but what it's going to look like in Gateway API, look at that link. And because this one is where it touches on it. And basically, I think Pooja's not around. She's going to create a separate gap for DNS talk. And I think this is where we're gonna drive it, because that's what kind of gonna be there. But it's gonna be outside. Yeah, that's a fair point in terms of because there are two things, right? First, we need to identify how just standard cluster IP would look like in Gateway API without multi-network, right? With having this whole in mind, okay, how we then in the future will look like for multi-network, right? But for now, because this whole effort of the Gateway API is towards that. So look at this, and this gives you, you can start discussion around that right away there. Okay.
Got it. Yeah, thanks, Marsha. And this, I guess, is some sort of not an alternative, but a parallel thing to the core DNS thing that's happening, right? Like, so it's all related. Like when you say the
Yes.
service cluster API.
So that's correct. So go there and see how how I think the proposal Pooja has there. But I think what you're saying, that's correct, because we need to talk probably with the DNS team as well in Kubernetes. I'm not sure whether there is one, or is it SIG networking, because there is core DNS and kube DNS. I'm not sure how that. I'm not familiar with those cases, with those projects. But this is something that, as I said, this is a big discussion when you think about
yeah,
this.
absolutely. Yeah, but yeah, thanks for pointing to that gaps. Maybe I can read that and then.
Yeah, look at that, because this is where this gonna this is where I think the initial discussion is gonna start, right? How it's gonna be for Gateway API, and then how that's gonna can then trickle down to the multi-network. Because our effort will be to, okay, let's enable us into the Gateway API. That's gonna be from our side. That effort will be on this side, right? But right now there is an effort to kind of get the cluster IP stuff.
Gotcha. Thanks, Marsha.
Yeah. Any other comments on this?
What about Sonia's cap about scheduling? Do we have that on the list?
Oh yeah, we can add it. What is that?
Let me find the link. Mine on my
I think
it handy too.
It's the 5075.
Oh, yep. I just brought it up. Yeah, so we got it. Okay, thank you. All right, cool. That's covered. Appreciate it.
This is the virtual devices, right? Is that what you're referring to? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, we have that here. This is gonna be tracked, and if there needs to be some other changes, let me know. We can always add and remove items. I'm gonna add the all these as we approve them, and then we can track them and see how they are. I think, yeah. Any other comments to this? Any others to the main thing? I know what we're gonna track, what's happening around it, but any comments to the release, the main thing? Like, no? Okay. All right, so I will, by probably end of today, will populate this this will be in the multi-network project repository. There is a multi-network API. I don't think we're just gonna use it as the maybe just as the repo for the API. Not gonna do anything there yet, so it's not confusing. But yeah, I will do the main multi-network repository, and the link here. This is where I'm gonna populate stuff. All this. Okay. So I think the next thing is I would like to know what is our commitment from this community on implementing what we are discussing here. I think we never like openly mentioned that or asked that or talked about. I think I always inferred in some ways that, oh yeah, we're gonna design this, the API, and everyone's gonna jump on it and implement it. But I don't think anyone kind of, or we never committed. And I'm gonna be first to say that our goal from Google side is to work in Cilium with Cilium community to eventually get this enabled over in the Cilium project. But I would like to hear other folks, what are their thinking on this one. Is there any and I think start with Lionel. I think I did ask you last week, but I don't know whether is that you will see, or is that like your goal eventually to your CNID array eventually support this pod network, because I'm not sure I got that clear message.
I think to me, the idea would be to have a smooth transition between what we are using now and what will be in the future with multi-network. So switching from Multus to something more modern could be great. And I would need also the support of services over secondary networks. That's my main goal.
I hear you. So, but does that mean that you're gonna adapt pod network, or you're gonna just work towards the other items? Because that's two different things for me, Lionel.
Or maybe I misunderstood the question, but
so
like
my question
idea
is your idea to have a full support for pod network, the way we whatever is gonna like I have a draft here, whatever we are designing here. That's my question, right?
Yeah,
because
the idea is to switch from Multus to something that is as standard as possible, and to have the ability to implement our own service way.
And considering no, but okay, still didn't I didn't hear that. I know you what you want to achieve. Do you want to achieve it with multi-network effort? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, if multi-network becomes the standard, yes, of course. Or
okay.
I mean, if Machine would be there, he would answer better than me. But I mean, that's how I understood it.
All right, so that's I'm taking that as like a maybe, because we're working together on this. That's how I'm seeing it, and to get it successful, this is where I'm trying to get a buy-in from folks to because getting you said becoming a standard. It's not becoming the standard out of nowhere, right? We need to get a buy-in from everyone and engagement from everyone to get this working in a ways where, okay, this is how I do want to work and I want this to work. That's my goal here, right? If you're saying that if this is gonna be a standard, become a standard, then maybe I will adapt it. That's how I'm hearing.
No,
because as I said, that's what I'm saying is, yes, the service is coming. That's our goal, as I mentioned, right? That's definitely current scope is.
I mean,
yeah,
the idea is that Multus is there, but having something more standard is, of course, a way better, and I'm working towards this. So pushing for something standard like multi-network is a way better than having something that. Like
and this is where I'm hoping this is Doc has his hand. I'm gonna let him now speak.
Yeah, this is a really good question about like what are you committed to in terms of implementation. I'm a real big believer that you build a better standard if you have some implementation to compare it to. So in the early days of this group, I mean, we talked about the dirty word reference implementation, right? So
right.
I think that we had said, we didn't want to have a reference implementation because it kind of becomes a de facto like usage, right? And I mean, there's part of me that says like that kind of work is really good. I see the CNI DRA driver as being like an important place to figure out these gaps. And if that can be a way forward for people using CNI to like adopt more of this kind of what I would call DRA for networking mentality, that we use DRA for networking, I think that'd be great. And I certainly have an interest in something like that, being a maintainer of Multis, right? So kind of de facto standard. If people have a better way of doing this, I think it's quite likely. Like, let me just give a like short example. Okay, so in the past, with device plugin and SROV, you would use Multis as kind of an intermediary, and you'd use it along with the device info spec to like pass along configuration parameters that the terminal SROV CNI needed. In a DRA scenario, you can potentially have a like much cleaner and more direct way to do that, right? Because in device plugin, you just got this integer counter, it'd go up, it'd go down, and that's really kind of all you got, that in the label, right? That's it. With DRA, there's potentially like a way that you can, you know, hang some more data off of that and get exactly what you need for to configure those SROV devices. So I think that there's stuff like that that's going to wind up being, you know, quite a bit better. And the bottom line is legacies are as legacies are. Like in my world, there will probably be, you know, some Multis CNI for a while, and I want to see the world get better. So in terms of implementation commitments, I think part of it that I am kind of the most interested in is that, okay, so, you know, what we've defined here, at least in the past, we've said that CNI is an implementation detail. And I can understand that approach, but I have an investment in CNI as like a common API and footprint, a lingua franca for people in order to integrate their solutions with Kubernetes, and CNI being a common footprint for that. I can see if we are coming up with ways to do networking using DRA alone without CNI. I'm personally invested in seeing a way that, you know, there's like a common patterns of usage for DRA and pod network for people to build network solutions that aren't disintegrated, right? Like I want to see solutions that can be integrated together, and that there's, you know, common patterns. So if you're a Kubernetes administrator and you're trying to like debug a problem on your system, like there's like common place to look for that. For today, it's maybe not as clean with CNI, but you can go pick up your CNI config and you can kind of unwind how it works from there. Potentially with pod network and DRA, we'll have some kind of common footprint to be able to say, like, these are the network solutions integrated on my cluster. And as an administrator, or as maybe like a support staff for that cluster, you can figure out what's going on without it being black boxed. So I'm really curious to see how that's going to shake out, and I'm still not exactly sure what's going to happen there, but it's certainly, I certainly am interested in implementation at kind of from that angle. And I don't know if this is like what becomes next of CNI, because I also see that, you know, CNI could potentially have better, you know, bindings to Kubernetes. And then kind of last but not least is there's also this kind of runtime considerations here too, like what happens at runtime. Are there like, you know, kind of standardized ways to say, for example, get your net namespace and be able to operate on it, for example. So yeah, that's kind of my area of interest is, you know, so twofold is I'm interested in how we move forward with CNI DRA driver and the potential for that kind of a usage pattern being able to like migrate to a better world. And then when we have more formalized of like, hey, there's this DRA for networking, how can we standardize that and make for common patterns of usage, maybe in tandem with something like next evolution of CNI or whatever becomes of it, to give people like a common way of working on this, which I think will be a benefit to members of the community across solutions and across vendors.
But that kind of boils kind of to, I agree with you on the aspect of having one way on how we are now dealing and connecting the array with and directing the array to do the networking in a pod. I agree on that one. And I think this is where we could define a standardization from our side. And this is where probably Lionel is going to have some, an unfortunate name, a reference implementation on how that is done, right? And this is what everyone could follow, I think. But this is kind of the backend. I'm asking about the front end, right? Because the front end today with the DRA is just DRA, right? You have the resources and all that. I think my question is about not about what's going to be the backend, how you're going to implement. Are you going to respect the front end, right? The pod network, because this is where this effort is all about. And I wonder what's the value in it from here. I thought that we had the value on kind of unified API, a better defined how that behaves and is standardized through the API side. Then I agree with you on the backend on how that part is done, but this is done, but then under the hood. And one value about that standardization of the backend is the debuggability. I agree on that part is very important. But then here in our effort right now, what I'm asking for is the front end part, right? And do you see so this is the question, Doug. Are you seeing Multus eventually? Because even Lionel said, oh, Multus isn't standard, but I was in a kind of hope that Multus can transform in such a way that it will work with pod network, right? Is that something that's viable?
I mean, certainly, I'm definitely interested in that as well. And yeah, I'm, at least to me, I'd say the front end and back end of this are inextricably linked in my mind. Because here's the thing, right? Like, okay, so what I see from my current understanding of how we've evolved in this community is that, okay, using DRA alone, just like the pure DRA to like put together your own solution, I don't think will be as good as having like pod network as a like level of abstraction for it, right? To kind of give you a standard front end way to express your intent to take a multi-network action, right? I do think that that's important, but also, yeah, in the way that they're implemented in the back end, and then you have some whatever view into how things are configured, integrated, etc. And I'd say starting with the resource claim status, right? Like, so that is like a step forward to that for me, as you can see those results in one way or another. But yeah, I'd like to see those kind of grow together here, that like front end and back end. But yeah, certainly I'd ideally like to make sure that in the future Multus would work with both, right? And certainly it's like prior to 130 Kubernetes 131, we had some like example DRA bindings in Multus, and I'd like to see that grow. And if it can grow to work with pod network, all the better. So certainly I'd like to see that bridge that gap, and I do think that that'll be important to my users.
So, and this is where exactly I think, Lionel, I'm not sure how that kind of looks from your point of view, because you said if Podneto becomes another standard from Multus, that my ideal is to ensure that Multus can become Pod network eventually, right? Or transition to that, right? I think that's where the kind of the deal is. You're looking at like implementation from the DRA point of view and from the like backend side. I agree that that's just doing that part, but I think what I'm more concerned is the front end, right? What is your front end? Are you going to just use DRA APIs and be done with it? And I think this is where I haven't really into the DRA net that you linked, but I think this is the goal of that piece. That is just simple. I don't care about networking. It just has to have interfaces and IPs, and that's it. I think this is very bare bones stuff that it doesn't care about. The other aspects is we care, right? Multi-homing, having services, having network policies. Those are the pieces that I think this effort is striving to ensure that VPC-like what we mentioned, right? VPC-like experience in Kubernetes, right? Where all the features that I have for today for pods, I want them to be multiplied per each network, right? That's the goal. I think that's kind of the kind of abilities and APIs that we want to strive with this one. And that's why where my question coming from, right? Who is willing to kind of implement the front end API for this, not the backend, right? And having the commitments from my point of view is then getting all the folks that are interested engaged in the APIs, right? How that's going to look like. I don't want to be the only one driving this. I would like to have a feedback on how this should look like and get everyone engaged, because yeah, we're going to implement all of it later on in our own respective areas, right? That's and I'm bringing that up as well from I heard from Boway, from the experience what happens with the gateway API. They were in the same kind of boat back in like 4 years ago or 5, right? Where all the implementers get together, they all committed to have this implemented, and they've worked together on how the API should look like, right? And then as soon as that came out, they all had implementations for the API, right? So this is what I want to kind of follow up here as well, that we are working towards that. So, and this is where my question is coming from as well, right? On is that API is going to be just, okay, you have an API and yeah, good luck with it, or are we planning to have this other folks, other implementations looking into it and get implemented? I think that's my kind of maybe you might say existential as well ask here on who is going to implement this, right? If we are it's just an API with just one implementation, I don't think that's valid, right? I'm not sure you see all my do you all see my point here, right? Because I think that's the goal of success of this project is that, right? How many adaptations of it we have, right? And how many engagements. If we don't have that, then we might not get the traction, and then the project is doomed kind of from the beginning. Any comments? Any feedback on that?
The more engagements, the better, for sure.
Yeah, but that's why I'm kind of asking for who can get involved in kind of having the implementation. And Doug, I hear you what you're saying, but do you think that from your side you would get engaged to get Multus aligned with this in a few as soon as that comes out, or that's maybe?
You're putting me on the spot, Maciej.
Yes, I do. So maybe you don't want to, but basically we are in a group where I think we all here because we want to get this. You see my point, right? As I said, right? I want if I get folks engaged with this one and put it on the line a bit, then we all engage and we all want this to succeed, not only my side to get it in. That's I think this is and I don't want to. Okay, that's I'm not sure, right? So.
Maciej, let me say that I am interested, and what I am trying to do is so currently what I am trying to do is explore the areas from which I can engage in it, and I'm looking at those. And certainly Multis is on the table. But also, like I said, like I'm really interested in what happens with people that are building CNI based solutions as this world evolves. So I'm trying to figure out, where in the spectrum does that fall? But certainly I could see Multis being extended to Pod Network. Like I would certainly like that, and I'm interested in it. So yeah, I'm interested from a couple different angles, and I am looking for the places where I can figure out the commitment. But yeah, no, and I appreciate that you're trying to be like, hey, we need
I am
like
being
group and
bit
team
upfront.
effort here, right? Yeah.
I am being a bit upfront here because that's kind of to get. I'm trying to get this off the ground and be successful. I think that's my goal here, right? To ensure that we can get there. But yeah. Okay, I think we're gonna leave it at that. All right. Any other comments to this?
Maybe next week I'll try to bring Moshin. He could answer better than me to this question.
Okay. All right. So next thing is I think I have some parts of the design that we talked back through the last year with a lot of details of the objects. I started looking into the beta version of the DRA objects, so you can look at the design and start commenting over the first sections. There is not everything. I'm still work in progress, so I'm gonna keep adding new things, how that's gonna kind of relate to kind of adding to the pod network and to the pod itself through the DRA. But I think from what we discussed and called out, you can start reading and see A, how that pod network object is going to look like, B, how we are going to translate that pod network into DRA, right? So those are the two aspects that are already added there with, I think, good level of detail. So take a look. And if anything, we can go over it next week, or maybe even now if we don't have any other topics, if you want to. But basically, yeah, I am still gonna. This is still work in progress, as I mentioned, so be wary of that. It's missing a lot of details as well, or like stuff like what we all called out in implementation standardization, right? So aspects like you have to your implementation has to update the status of the resource claim, then stuff around the CNI and RI, how that should happen. I'm not sure whether that should be standardized. We have some reference, or maybe this can be mentioned of one way. So how can that be implemented? And I think those are two aspects. And last item that's still missing is the default network, right? The notion of default network, how to handle it, and how to install the whole thing based on how you want to achieve, right? So the aspects of soft versus hard installation of this whole multi-networking. I assume, Doug, that you're writing. I appreciate your. I didn't want to write up things so that I don't overinterpret things. So I think I thank you for writing that down. About the commitment stuff. Okay. Any other topics, folks? Do we want to go over that design, or just leave it that to offline for you folks to kind of get a hang of and read through that?
I haven't fully read it.
Yeah, I just
I
linked
saw
it, so
this,
I don't expect it. I don't
right,
expect
but
that.
I saw this configuration in the pod network spec, and I assume that this will create the pod network, the resource claim, right?
So yeah,
But
let's look at it then. Where am
I have a question around this, because Or do you keep the request and the allocation part or the scheduling part?
Right. So keep in mind that's where basically your implementation. So this is kind of the gist of it, right? We have pod network. User creates that guy. We have a control that's going to create the template out of that, right? And then the pod basically will reference just the template. And I'm going to give more details. There is a section which is empty for now. Pod network attaching pod network to a pod. So this is empty for now, but I am going to add that. But basically, that's the gist of how I'm seeing this. And now, as you called out, so the view of the object itself, it has, as we called out, has the config. This is the direct reference to the DRA object called device configuration. And in it, we have two fields. There is a, what are the fields? I think this is the link to the API if you want to go in details, but there are two fields called driver and parameters. The driver is just I think this has to be the name of the driver, right, Lionel, in the DRA. And basically this is all defined by your implementation, right? So you define it, you pass it, right? And then the parameters is an open structure. It's again up to you or implementation what you require in that section, right? It can be empty, or you can parameterize and say whatever you need. And here's an example. Sorry, Doug, if you don't want me, I can get rid of your multi. This is my
No,
my wishful.
no, that no, and I hope I didn't send the right message. Like
No,
or I didn't
I
send
know,
the wrong
but
message because I want Multis to be compatible with this.
right. So
And I just am not ready to make a public commitment at
no,
the
that's
moment,
fair,
right?
and
So yeah.
that's perfectly fine. Yes, I agree with you. So, but basically, as an example, if something like that. So before we go to the class name, there is a config, right, which has the opaque field, and then it has a driver. This needs to be some specific string matching your driver that you're gonna create that the array then knows how to call, and then parameters. And you can see here what I did. I grabbed the network attachment definition JSON and converted it to a structures, right? So basically you have your master mode. This is your CNI configuration, right? Then you have your IPAM and all this, right? So and by the way, this can be NAT as well as the whole thing. You can put the whole NAT here, and there can be a field called, I think it's called config, right, Doug? I don't remember. And the JSON as a string, you can keep that if you want to, right?
Yep.
I'm saying that this is sky's the limit. You can do in this section whatever you want. So that's the config section, and then there is a device class, device class name. What I looked at the DRA, this is a required field. You cannot kind of go without it. So I am making that a required field in our section as well. So each implementation has to provide at least one device class which the specific implementation can reference. So that's another thing that we didn't discuss, but looking at the details, and you can look at some of the kind of comments here. I copied some of the comments from the DRA documentation as well. Basically, that's basically that statement, right? You can create a empty device class that then I can select anything what I want, right? And device class is just a name to the device class, and the implementation define that. So there are two aspects to kind of semi-answer your question, Lionel. How to do things, right? You do it through those things, through those elements. You have the full capability, flexibility of defining your device configuration, and then device class additional pieces, right? So you call out on what sort of scheduling capabilities you need, right, in a specific config. At least I hope that's sufficient. And if I'm not, then this is where we need to kind of fill in the gaps. So now going back to the DRA aspects, what is going to happen, right? I have the resource clan template that's going to be created out of this. This is like a templarized version of what it would look like. And you can see the pieces that are hard-coded is this, right? I always always allocate one exact count of whatever you defined in here, right? So I think the name is just an arbitrary name. If you want to, then you can reference in your specific container. But I think what's important is this element, the class, right, of the device I need. And I always will pick one of it out of that. And you define the class, right? So it can be whatever you want with all the blows and whistles the array has for the class. But this is all on the implementation side. They provide that with all the specs and what's not, blows and whistles inside of the device class. User doesn't care about the device class. So that's how I think this should be. And correct me, Lionel, if I'm missing something here, and I have a big gap here. But I looked at all the required versus optional fields for the template, and this is all I kind of came up with. And this is the resulting field for the example above from Multus, right, that I had, right? So you have the device class. It's going to be named after the pod network, the data plane. As I mentioned here, it's going to be created in every namespace, but this is example for default namespace. Some label I wanted to control to track that. And then request will be some name of the pod network with some random ID so that it doesn't overlap. The device class name user provided that, and this is provided by the implementation. And then the parameterization, right? Request for the same guy, and then whatever the parameters you provided in the pod network.
Because
so that's how. So this is how I'm seeing this transitioning. But is there something I am missing?
Yeah, in the request, the selector is missing.
Okay.
The selector selects the device that is in the resource slice.
Can the class have that?
Yeah, it can. But
are you saying that means that each class, or you are saying then because of that the class would have to say let's say the selector. So okay, I would say okay, all the net devices, that's my class. And now I would have to create a separate additional class saying ETH0, ETH1, ETH3. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, it depends on how the driver is implemented, I would say.
Yeah, because this is where exactly, this is
like,
is this sufficient flexibility, right, or not?
Yeah, exactly. And if we do it this way, maybe we are like instructing the user to use the array in that particular way, in this exact particular way.
Or should then because what other thing, this is something that when we talked about this, should there be so inside the parameters, right, this section parameters, should there be a section controlling the creation of the template? So let's say this will have a request or maybe I don't know, it will have some prefix. So let's say multi-network request selector, and this will be a hard-coded field, which if I find it through my controller, and this will have some selectors, right? And this will have some selectors or whatever the object is for selector, what you're calling out, and then I will copy this over to this to here, right? To the request, right? You say there is a selector here. But I don't know, I'm not familiar so much with the selector, right? And then pass it here. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm thinking here?
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like we are copying or trying to redo the resource claim in the.
So this is where the question is, do we need this, right? I don't know. I'm not, so maybe I need to start reading more into the array and see. Let me dig into that myself then. Is that necessary, right? That we cannot live without that, and maybe that's the case, right? So maybe some of those fields you have to have. I wouldn't want to have a separate field for that. So I would like put it here so that, because I want this to be implementation specific, not a standard for pod network. Because as you said, I don't want the pod network to get all the fields. I think this should be those two fields, the array related, should be sufficient, right? And the config should be even optional, right? I should only be able to. I wonder. I think the question here to answer is, can I achieve all I want with just the class? right? Implementation provided me classes and I can all I need, right? Right. For example, and the question here would be, can I steer, let's say, VLANs? Let's say that, right? I want to have pod network and each pod network representing a VLAN. That's like the most basic thing I would like to achieve, right? I want to have a pod network data plane, let's say data plane VLAN 100, right? And so on and so forth, right? So basically the question is, can I achieve this? Can I achieve this with just having the class, or maybe extra parameter called VLAN here, right? Only. VLAN ID, right? Let's say that, right? And not having all those, just having that other section. So that's something that I think this is where the POC will show, and you're doing your DRA CNI will definitely prove it as well, to say that, yeah, I need those fields explicitly. So, and keep in mind, this is not final, this is just draft. This is where the POCs kind of needs to rectify that. Okay.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I was just wanted to mention about this
Right.
requesting, and
Yeah. So yeah, let's dig into that further to see what's needed to get that working, and see what's needed. Because you're right, and as you rightly said, I need to kind of dig into some of those aspects on how that would work and see. Okay, that's a fair. Leave a comment on that one so that it's not lost on the doc. And then I definitely won't get lost and to kind of to resolve that. But beside this is kind of the exactly, that's a good discussion, Lionel. That's what I wanted, right? Because this is how it would look like, and now let's poke holes into this, right? What is missing, what's not. And some details about garbage collection. I think this is wrong the way I think it's going to do, because I don't think a non-scoped. I started reading it, and I don't think a non-namespaced object can reference a namespaced one. So I think that garbage collection has to be done differently. But otherwise, yeah, I have some places where I put POC where needs to figure out some things. So there is that. Beside that, yeah, give it a read. See, do you agree with some of it, with the text, with the how it's spelled out and what's not? And yeah, I think we are almost at the time. Any other questions? All right, let's call it. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.